Now we're going to welcome into our show Max El-Hag. She is the founder and head coach of Training Think Tank and really just a great sounding board voice in the community. So, welcome to the show and welcome back on social media a couple weeks now. How does it feel?
Uh, it feels. I think it's a little good, a little bad. I think I've had a lot of really good experiences reconnecting with people in there and sharing things that opened up dialogues with a lot of people. Sometimes that were nasty and made me like question the decision, like, oh man, was this why I left in the first place? But then after they kind of played out, I realized like, oh, this is a good thing. This does make a difference. This does connect you to real people, even though it sometimes feels fake because it's through the internet. So
Mhm.
yeah, I think it feels good.
And even just for anybody who maybe doesn't know, I would encourage them to go look at your social media because you have a lot of really great topics that go into coaching, go into mental health, go into philosophy in general. But one of your first posts when you were reintegrated into social media, you said, nuance matters. Progress happens when people who disagree stay in the room and work towards solutions. I'll commit to that for 2025. Do you believe that just with some of the conversations you've been able to have in the past couple of weeks, you're able to see that happen?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of weird because I made that post and I left social media partially because of what was going on in the space, right? And there was so
Mm.
much. I mean, it was political as well. I think just the noise on social media was constant negativity, and the algorithm promotes conflict. And I was just going through challenging personal times. So then, when you open up social media and you're like, "Man, my professional life is just soured with people being hateful all the time. I just don't need this right now in my life." And I left. And I think a lot of people interpreted that just the events of the CrossFit Games were what made that happen, and people were waiting for me to say, like, "Are you still here in the sport? Are you doing this? Are you?"
Mhm.
So I made the post more so just as a public statement because I came back and the first thing I saw was people leaving. I'm out, this, that, and I was like, "Man, it's still going on." Like
Mm.
9 months later, so I saw it and was like, man, I'm kind of torn in between these two worlds because in some sense, all the athletes that took a step out, I understand their frustrations. I was, part of PFAA and helping and trying to figure out how do we professionalize things and make it safe before Lazar situation. So it's always been something important to me. But I also saw what happened in the last time that there was a public statement that created, an organizational change. And I think sometimes we think making a statement and taking a stand on that front will create the change and outcome we want. And I don't think it's always that linear. It's like, yeah, it'll make a change, but the change could be worse than we had anticipated. So I
Mhm.
knew I wasn't like fully aligned with that. And I'm obviously not fully aligned with how CrossFit handled things. But I own an affiliate that has a lot of members that didn't really care what was happening at the CrossFit Games from the
Mm.
beginning, and they're not emotionally tied to the situation, and they want to still do the Open. And I have some young athletes that still want that title. So I didn't really have a choice as a coach to pick a side. It was kind of like, well, in order for me to fulfill my job as a coach, I have to participate. And I think there are probably more people like me that are in the middle than the algorithm pushes, which are the extremes.
Yeah, for
So I
sure.
made a post to just put out like, hey, here's me. I'm in the middle of these two situations, which
Mhm.
I didn't anticipate would create conflict with both sides. So I was like, people like, oh, I can't believe you're doing it on one side. And then other people like, oh my God, I can't believe that you say you agree with some of the things athletes say. So it was interesting to try to take a middle stance, thinking, oh, I'll be friends with everybody, and realizing that you're actually creating enemies on both sides by being in the middle.
But
Mhm.
but I guess if that, and that kind of speaks to what you said about the state of play for social media and how discourse happens in those kind of pockets, that if you are making a statement that you feel is in the middle and you're pissing off both sides in a place that tends to be extreme, to me that almost signals that you're kind of where you need to be. Almost that like you're in a place that's probably more representative of more people in the real world when you don't have a keyboard and anonymity in front of you.
Yeah.
that, and I don't know, do you feel that? Has that come to light through discussion? Because I know you've been very a part of discussions in the past and present and future, and I'm sure this sparked some of that going forward.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it sparked conflict on both sides, which I think got resolved. But I think the biggest like bell curve was people like, thank you so much for starting this conversation. Like, this is how I felt. Like, I own an affiliate, but I also really understand what the athletes are going through. And I'm not really okay with how the sport's being handled, but I also don't want to throw away the baby with the bathwater. And they did make changes, and we want to see if they were good this year, even though they weren't transparent in how they communicated them. And they're, there's, for me, I'm very like, if I'm going to take a stand, I'm going to take a stand. And that meant for me, if I were going to pull my support from CrossFit, it meant I was pulling my affiliation. We weren't going to do it in the gym at all. That means that any athlete I have inside needs to film all their own videos and go unaffiliated on the thing. So it was like, now I'm taking a stand that's going to affect my whole sub community. And I
Hmm.
didn't really feel comfortable even entertaining that. I was like, this just doesn't seem fair. Even if I have a moral opinion about it, I don't think that it's fair for me to put it on everybody that I coach and all the coaches in my organization who might not agree with me.
Yeah, I think that speaks to one of the pitfalls of social media, though, at least in the online discourse platform, right? Because we automatically equate everyone's scenarios with each other, maybe falsely, when it's very clear that like you have a different buy-in than an athlete does, right? And you have a different buy-in than someone who's simply a fan of the sport, right? You are hitched to the wagon with a multitude of knots. Then it's not just an easy like single cut and you're free.
Yeah.
And I just I because we are now so deeply ingrained into this social media culture, it's really hard for me to see a way where we can best broadcast and advertise those discussions in a way that actually breeds empathy and compassion, and not that, because like you said, like most people don't realize your scenario. It's different.
Yeah.
How do they
Yeah.
empathize with you in that?
Yeah. Yeah, it is different. But also, I think the athlete's perspective is different. Like, I don't, in a lot of their posts, I didn't see them saying, like, hey, I'm out and you also should be out too, because how
Yeah.
dare they? They said
Yeah.
Right.
they have a public platform. They have a right to make whatever decisions they want. Some of them had a really close friend die in the water while they were competing. Like, that's
Mhm.
a heavy situation to go through. And it's every right for them to be like, hey, I'm out. This is my decision. It was heavy, and this is why. How it gets turned into like, oh, now I'm going to shit on this person and comment on their character and be like, oh, well, now that you have, like, it's just so weird for that to be the case. And I'm like, hey, they're not really displaying a side of the aisle. They're just one voice who happens to have a lot of fame, who made a decision in what was in the best interest of them for their career. And similarly, that's kind of what my post was. It was like, yeah,
Mhm.
I have some real strong feelings about what happened and how it was handled with. But I really have strong feelings too about how much this community is a wonderful conduit for a really cool sport that we've participated in. And it was also a conduit for exercise to be thought of in a more mindful way. And it was a conduit for me to have met most of my best friends in the world. And there's just so much other stuff that goes into the decision that I was like, oh, let me put some of this out there. So I don't know. I kind of went on a little bit of a rant there just to say, like, I think that people are not listening so much on social media. It's like they want the fight. Like, something posts and they're just like, right away I made that post and I had people like, there were some good comments, but right away in there I was like, man, these people are coming at me. But I was like in the mode that I was going to do it. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to engage in civil discourse. I'm going to
Mm.
see if this platform could be used to dismantle somebody's hostility and come to even a disagree and move forward perspective. So some of the people, we had conversations in the thread and then in the message system. And then afterwards, they're like, man, this conversation really gave me hope. I don't agree with you, but thanks for engaging. And I was like, okay,
Mhm.
people are people. Like, you can have it. It's just I don't think people are taking the time to do it. It's like they want to hate.
And I mean, you've been in this space for almost 20 years. And I know that in the last 20 years, social media has become so much more prevalent to whether you're a business owner, whether you're an athlete, like it's almost part of the gig that you do need to post and you do need to engage. But I'm curious, we keep going back to this word community. And I know that that is a huge reason why people joined CrossFit in the first place. It gave them a sense of community, a sense of belonging. Do you feel like over the course of the last 15 to 20 years that the definition of that maybe has changed a bit? Because when you see such polarizing views and such extreme hate on both sides, to me, that doesn't feel like community. Community feels like you can disagree with somebody, but have a conversation and walk away and still respect them, even if you don't agree.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that people are acting as if the people they're engaging with are part of their community, the way they talk. It doesn't seem like that. It seems like they are almost wanting to ostracize other people out of their community, to have the community only be people that think
Mm.
or act in the same way as them. And I think that's dangerous. I think, you know, it's happened a lot of times, even just with the methodology of CrossFit, is that you can get into groupthink. And if you're like, well, this is how it's done. And it's like, all right, well, if you don't have somebody in the room saying like, hey, maybe it could be done better this way, or maybe we should try this, or like, hey, this doesn't seem right. And I see this coming from this place. By having that very similar state of thinking all the time, never being challenged by diversity, I think you slow progress. Like you need diversity of thought, diversity of beliefs, diversity of backgrounds, diversity of compassion, diversity of intellect, diversity of body type. Uh, and it doesn't seem like that is something that's being necessarily strived for in dialogue. It's like you either believe what I believe or you're wrong. And that's what the nuance matters part of it was. It was like, hey, like, I don't think if it were possible to say, hey, we're going to take the top 100 athletes in the world and we're going to sit them down with Don Fall and Dave Castro in a room, and we're going to let all the legal shit back. Like they're going to be able to have an honest conversation about what should be done. Everything in that room could be said and then deleted so nobody else but them could hear and they could have a truly honest conversation. I bet you by the end of that whole process, if they were able to go through that most people would realize they probably agree on like 80% of the things. And then it's the 20% where nuance and decision making has to happen. But there hasn't really been much dialogue. And part of that's probably CrossFit's fault. I mean, they were extra non-transparent, it seemed, and then kind of rolled out the changes really late into the season and didn't really allow the two-way dialogue as much. But in fairness, I don't think the athletes did a great job of facilitating the entry point of the conversation. It was like, hey, we want these changes or we're out, or like, we want these changes. And that's not always a good way to like lead at the start of a negotiation. Like if I were walking into a room and I'm like, hey, you're going to do this or else, probably the defenses of the opposite side would go up. And it's just then like very hard then to find the common ground. So I think there were mistakes made on both sides of this problem that got created. And I think everybody knows there were mistakes made. But
Yeah.
then now, how do we fix them? Like, is the path just, hey, let the athletes go and build out the World Fitness Project as a competitor and hopefully they crush it and it pushes pressure on CrossFit? Or would it have been better had they all been in the same room making decisions together? Or, you know, I don't know the answer to that. I just know for me, the best decision was like, hey, I got athletes that are doing this thing and they really care about it. And I got to support them because that's my job. And I also want to make a change in it. And I don't want to just sit here complicit and say that I'm okay with everything that happened without being honest about that. So I'm going to say, I really disagree with what happened. And I really want to continue the professionalism of the sport. But I'm still going to do it for the sake of my community and, you know, the history of what was created in the first place, while
Yeah.
also supporting the other things too. Cause I have people competing in WFP and I'll be there.
Yeah.
So it's not like I'm,
And the game season and both.
yeah. So I'm just kind of a fitness coach and I just happen to be involved in both of those spaces, I guess.
Yeah, which is which is tough, obviously, because it makes you feel like you're in a Mexican standoff with both sides, and but at the same time, it's I think it's an interesting point that you mentioned about the negotiation tactic of the athletes, because to me, it really felt like a play from someone who was just tired of being treaded upon. It's the like when someone finally has a bargaining chip, it feels like, or they have something that has happened so drastic and they have always been the one that's felt like they're chasing their tail. Like that's when I feel like the hard lines are taken.
Yeah.
And it's tough for me to see a way where they would go to the table and be like, we need to have this dialogue for the umpteenth time, right? Which I know that they have done
Yeah.
repeatedly over really the history of the sport, right?
Yeah.
And and you mentioned that like groupthink. I mean, you remember just as probably just as well as anyone, like that groupthink issue and the misrepresentation of CrossFit being truly open source has been something that's plagued it from the get go. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
you go back to the Black Box Summit, you go back to the kind of um, ostracizing of people like OPT or Rob Wolf or people that were pretty ingrained in the early like pieces of CrossFit and have done well for themselves since. But also at the same time, it's like that's almost always been a byproduct of the passion that follows people's discovery of the sport.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's just look, if I were in the athlete's perspective and I didn't like their career path is different. So like they go to the CrossFit games, they consider themselves CrossFit athletes. They don't their decision doesn't then influence downstream other people they're coaching with, whatever. So it's like you
Yeah.
come, you say, hey, you have these alternatives. On one hand, you go compete in the CrossFit games. You're not going to get anything financially unless you crush it. You're not even sure whether you're going to get a lot this year because it's all tied to signups and the prize purse might drop from last year. So it might be even less money than you were getting before. You are
I
going
think
to,
I saw it dropped 30% from last year
okay, so there you
based
go.
on
So you
signups.
make
Yeah.
30% less money to go in this path. You've been treated in a way that you don't like, that's not treating you well. You had a safety concern that now you're putting your own life on the line, future competitions, whatever, if safety isn't super dialed in. So there's a risk. Or you go to this other path where you have guaranteed income, you have the ability to go to the events, the volume is lower, you have it run by somebody who's a professional in the sport, uh, and you have a set contract. Like that's a pretty, I don't think there's many people saying, hey, go this way. I think almost all of them are going to go this way. And some of them are going to go this way while keeping this also as an option and doing both.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
I get where the athletes are coming from. And I think the fact that people aren't more empathetic to that on the internet is very strange. But I also don't think it's reflective of most of our community. Like most of our community is gym owners or people that go to CrossFit 5 times a week, or, it's just a different group of person that's potentially doing the open and supporting that infrastructure. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
there's
it's all,
nothing just a quick point. There's nothing more eye-opening than going to these events in person because I think that does really give you a pulse of what this definition of community is. And I mean, at the couple that I've recently been to, I've had conversations with people that we disagree with in thought, but we could still high five at the end and be like, yeah, we still love this thing and we still want to see it succeed. So I think that it is interesting to get off of the internet sometimes and go to these things in person.
well, I also think it forces a recalibration of I don't want to say how we gauge character and people as a whole, right? Because there's still a split between what people do online and what they do in person.
Yeah.
And that
Very
what
good point.
that wasn't something that existed 15 years ago, um I know personally, I have met multiple people at events that like were like sending me awful DMs or trashing me online and trashing our like product, and then I go and talk to them in person and I see them and I make the connection. I'm like, "Oh, you're so and so." And then suddenly their tune changes, right?
Yeah.
And it's
Mhm.
like, "Okay,
I ain't
well,
got time for that anymore.
to a I don't know. I haven't used a Marvel reference in a while, but like at what point does does Doctor Doom's mask actually become something that's fused with you? This mask that you put on
Yeah.
social media, is it real? Is
Yeah.
it something you take off for convenience? When you deem it necessary, or like I just mentioned, has it actually fused? And I have to judge you by you know what you're willing to stoop to,
Yeah.
and it's tough, right? Because like I want to give people the benefit of the doubt. If I have a good conversation with you in person, or
Mhm.
elsewhere outside of an Instagram comment section or a DM, and then suddenly like that script flips, it's I think a lot of people really struggle with where's the truth in this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, social media is kind of dangerous in that sense because it rewards behavior that chases the algorithm as opposed to rewards people for actually putting out their thoughts and feelings and whatever. So, and then people will use that as a guise. They're like, "Oh, everything I do is for views. Don't take it so seriously." And I'm like, "Yeah, but you're like, if I walk up to you in person and I'm like, F you, you're a piece of crap. I can't believe you did X, X, and X. I can't say like, oh, well, I was just saying that to you to get these people to pay attention to us and don't let your feelings get hurt by it. But that's kind of what the internet has created. And I'm like, hey,
Mm.
Hmm.
I left social media and like I'm a pretty stable human in society who's succeeded and has a set like not succeeded at every level I wanted to, but feel pretty good about who I am in the world. And I could read a comment from a random stranger that triggers an emotion that for like the next 2 hours, I'm like, man, I wish I could go to this person's house, like, and just
Mhm.
Yeah.
really see if they would say this to my face. Uh, and that's just like that's a real feeling you get from this. And I think some people are maybe more callous. So like they could read a comment that's hateful and just be like, ha 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 ha, not think about it too much later. But I think most people out there, it's very dangerous in that sense that people are willing to just play with other people's feelings for views and then tell people afterwards, like, hey, don't take it so seriously, buddy. It's just for social media. It's like, I don't know. That's not how I vibe. Like if you're gonna act a
No,
certain
me neither.
way, you live by that in the world, even if it's the digital world. In some sense, you're like putting that energy out into the rest of people out there, and they're reading that stuff. And I don't know, it's just not who I am as a person.
Yeah. Well, at some point, those two worlds are going to become inseparable, at least based on the trends of where we head now. Like, at some point, you can't separate the two. And that's where I'm like, the level that you allow around you in your behavior is ultimately what you're going to be judged by. And that's a really tough place to be. I think it's something I've wrestled with as well quite a bit. But also at the same time, it's like, at some point you have to protect your own mentals, right?
Yeah.
You have to protect yourself from this. And if that means I don't want to be, and I'll say this, I don't want to be calloused. I don't think becoming calloused for me is a path to being able to fully experience life the way that I want to, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a
And I
good
think
point.
it's common in CrossFit too, because there's a lot of pain tolerance that's required to be great. So you can kind of desensitize to pain. But pain is a very important signal that your body sends to you for a very important reason to protect you. So if you become so tough and so insensitive to discomfort in so many ways, at some point it becomes self-harmful, which is why I've always tried to teach like balance in my training philosophies. It's like, yeah, if you want to go hard, great. But that also means you need to recover just as hard. You need to learn how to take care of yourself and eat properly and get enough sleep, because there is this kind of balance point that if you like, I think you'll see a lot of high level CrossFit athletes in their 40s that don't move well anymore. Where you're like, oh, you
Mhm.
can't squat anymore. Like you had this beautiful squat in your 20s and you were talking about this methodology, and now you did so much of it that, and with so much callousness to how you acted, now you can't move. And I think that behavior physically happens in training, but physical and mental adaptations are very similar. So it's like we've created such a toughness in how we deal with the stressors of training that we also forget, like, oh well, emotions are part of the human experience for a reason. Like they
Yeah.
tell you something about how you're acting in environment and the stress you're putting your body under. And I think people ignore a lot of important things like that in how they act. And eventually, it catches up with you at some point.
It's
So
interesting you
then,
say that. Oh, sorry, but just because I couldn't help but like think about Rich talking about his knee on the
yeah.
25.1 announcement, being like, "I can't do everything, but I can do this one." And I'm like, man, like, and he was the poster child for movement, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Like that, he moved as well as anybody in the sport, and it was a hallmark of his success. But like, I guess like you said, the human body does have its limits.
Yeah, it has limits, and who knows, like, you know, I don't know other than him being great, and I don't want to like cause hate for
Yeah,
Rich Froning fans at all, but let's say he did 1,000 units of training in a normal week, and most people probably only tolerated 600 because he was known for doing more
volume.
volume than anyone and working harder than anyone, and it made him a champion. And then it becomes a hallmark for the training philosophy. But it's like, the way I am as a person, I'd say, okay, well, could you have done 700 and been more dominant? Like, would you have maybe been stronger or faster? And you ask those questions. And I don't know, maybe having that doubt and pulling his volume back would have made him a worse athlete, but
Yeah,
maybe it could have made him better and then maybe not had as many knee issues. I don't know. It's just how I personally think of coaching is like, you come from martial art, or I came from martial arts, and you have the tough people. The tough people who spar all the time and who want to spar all the time have brain damage in their 40s and they can't
Oh
walk.
my
They have
God.
ripped up knees
oh
from
yeah,
getting leg locked from crazy people at full speed. So I took a much more mindful approach to this because I was like, well, I know what happens in like football and wrestling and BJJ if you go too hard too often and don't take care of yourself. So I'm going to try as a coach to make sure that I model high level performance with longevity. And it was part of like Noah having a long career and Travis had been competing for a really long period of time. It was kind of like I don't know, my guiding light in how I tried to prepare people. And I don't
mhm,
know, maybe that prevents championship at the highest level, or maybe the champions are only the champions because of who they are. Like, it's not what they're doing for training. It's just like, hey, you think right, you got the right genes, you got the right belief system, the right support structure, the right work ethic, the right timing, and like that's why you're the champion more than what you were doing.
yeah.
But then how do you think, and do you think that we can get to this point where we're able to have open dialogue and we're able to have conversations? Like, do we really need to be responding to every message on social media and trying to convince people to have that conversation? Or what do you think? Like, and I know that this issue is not just a CrossFit issue. I know it's more of a world issue and we're talking about big things here, but is there a recipe that we can get to a point to have more conversations like this?
Yeah.
Mm,
Well, I have been in my personal life trying to do that more often.
yeah.
Like I've kind of had I feel like religion, sex, and politics are like three things that in my early days I would have open conversations with people that would just turn into fights. Not like it would just be topics that like would only be combative. So I at some point I was like, all right, I'm never talking about religion, sex, and politics with anybody anymore. Like I'm just going to keep these thoughts to myself, blah blah blah. But that kind of silence and introspection about it didn't really serve me. And now you see like, well, now people are being triggered at that level about everything. Like you can't have a conversation, you can't put anything up on the internet without it triggering somebody to talk shit about you or do something if you get a big enough social following in general. So I
Don't say
started
you don't like ranch. That'll really piss the internet off.
Oh my gosh.
ranch dressing.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh my god.
Ah,
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
I
Yeah.
know it's polarizing.
Yeah.
Landmine avoided.
Yes, yes. Good. I won't comment on it, even though I like it.
And I hate it.
Oh, I love it.
It's so good.
But
I'm glad the three of us could still be friends here.
Yeah.
yeah.
So I try to do that now a little bit more in public. like reading biblical scriptures and talking to people about, hey, you believe this, but like, how are you living in accordance with this? Or this book says this, but, and you say you believe this, but you're acting in this way. I see that as being a conflict. Like, talk to me about it. And I've just been engaging in those discussions. And that's kind of part of what the social media thing was for me. It was like, hey, if I believe that complex things need to be talked through for people to form ideas, then I need to be like, quote unquote, brave enough to start putting out discussion oriented concepts. Not
Mm.
like, hey, this is my stance and do it, but hey, here are two sides. Here's some things to think about, talk. Like getting the dialogue kind of spawned forward. I'm hopeful that just doing it will help, and maybe giving people a model for what a civil discussion is like. And,
Yeah.
uh, how do you engage with somebody who is extra mean and combative like that? Ironically, that doesn't phase me. Like when somebody's mean and combative, that doesn't really bother me that much because I come from such a combative place
I was
growing
gonna
up.
say, sounds like martial arts.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm very comfortable in that realm of somebody disagreeing or yelling or, speaking. And I think some people naturally get scared at that because they've been bullied or somebody screams. And I'm like, all right, well, all right, you can raise your voice in front of me. It's not going to be anything that has ever happened. And it's probably not going to scare or intimidate me. So get it out and then I'll respond and I'll wait. Whereas I think most people, that type of response, whether it's coming on the internet or in person, it makes them cower because they get scared and they protect themselves. And my natural disposition is like, all right, cool. You want to act like a tough guy? Cool. Let's be tough and let's engage in a discussion. So that doesn't necessarily bother me so much. And now I've just been working on like, all right, how do I stay calm in this response to get a dialogue with somebody that I know disagrees with me?
Mhm.
And maybe by doing it and leaving it up on my comments, people reading it start to realize like, oh, you can engage. Like you don't, if somebody goes down into like pig level behavior where they're just spewing filth at you, you don't need to go down and meet them at that level of engaging in the disgust. You can just try to act civilly. And then if they don't want to engage beyond that in any other thing than calling you an idiot or saying you're dumb or saying you're not thoughtful, then you just, at some point, you just turn the other cheek and walk away.
Mhm.
And hopefully over time then we rebuild communities of people that just have that more healthier way of doing things. And maybe that means that we have to leave certain cultures that have just gotten too toxic and unsaved and build our own communities, but I don't know what that looks like or how it
Yeah.
happens.
What would you say has been the immediate response then to you? One, seeking out those conversational, like aspects, and being able to respond in kind like that. Because are you familiar with Brandolini's law, or the? I guess I would call it's called the bullshit asymmetry principle.
No.
It it's a principle that basically states the amount of energy and time required to put out bullshit into the world is exponentially lower than the energy it takes to dispel it or counteract it
Mm.
with knowledge, intelligence, truth, things like that.
Yeah.
And that asymmetry is ultimate. And a lot of people believe that that asymmetry is what the social media engine kind of feeds off of, right?
Mm.
Because I can throw a like you said, a dirty, pig-headed comment into the comment section, and if I believe that I'm not going to get called out on it, or someone's not going to take the time to respond, then that only means like, hey, let's double our efforts. I can start throwing this around everywhere. But if someone does that and then gets met with an intelligence response that disarms you, then you've effectively like, you know, cut that, cut that head of the snake off.
Yeah.
And it deters people. So I'm curious if you've seen it one way or the other.
Yeah, well, yes, I've had two people leave really hateful comments that I responded to with not meanness at all. More so just like, hey, could you clarify what you're saying? Because what I wrote, I wasn't intending at all for you to interpret it the way that you were. And you're being very like emotional in this response, it seems to me. Can you help clarify the discussion? Because this doesn't make sense. Then other people kind of had my back in the comments of stuff, and then I had private conversation with them in DMs, and then they deleted their comments. So it's
Oh,
kind of
wow.
like, oh, here's a model. Like somebody responds with something that way. I could have easily went in and been like, hey, buddy, learn how to read. That's not what I said at all. Like you're an idiot and maybe need reading comprehension work, and met the fighting with fighting, like gone into it bullheaded. But I was just trying to be mindful because I don't perceive putting that type of an engagement on the internet does anything good for anybody. Like, even if it meant, okay, next week Max is going to have 100,000 followers, but all this platform does now is spew negativity and bring filthy comments to me. The net effect in my life is a negative from that. It's like, all right, well, you gave me all these followers because I played the algorithm, but now the algorithm's messing up my mental health because all day, every day, I'm dispelling bullshit in the comments. So that was kind of a positive internal response where I was like, hey, people are more civil than they're acting. They need to be given
Mm.
a chance. They need to be confronted more directly. They need to be given a chance to realize that maybe sometimes the things they say aren't as thought out as they think they are. Because sometimes if you challenge a statement with a question and then they have to think about what they just wrote, they're like, oh, now that you asked me to think about it, I don't really believe everything that I just wrote down. But if you respond to a statement with another statement that's saying that that statement is wrong, now there's no reflection because they're looking at your words and they're looking to go into combat on that. So I think like utilizing Socratic method and asking more questions as opposed to making statements, not engaging in things. I don't know if it's going to work or not. And I only have
Well,
11,000 followers on Instagram. So it's not winning the algorithm for me, but
but I mean,
it's what
but there is I would say there's real world evidence behind that. That's essentially what Daryl Davis, are you familiar with him? Is R&B and blues musician who's basically had like countless KKK members
oh,
leave the Ku
yeah.
Klux Klan. Yeah.
Yes. He's had
That
that. He became friends with them and then converted them and they left the Klan and he keeps
and
their robes.
yeah, they send him their robes when they leave the Klan, and
Wow.
he's basically taken that approach ultimately. Now, granted, it's a it's an N of one, right? Because it's a singular person applying this method, and he has found success, and inertia is very real in that regard. But he, yeah, that's pretty much the method. He just sits down and starts asking questions. Why do
Yeah.
you feel the way that you do? When you say this, what do you mean by this? Do you actually believe this? Or and it's been pretty transformative, at least. And but again, I don't know how that works at scale, right? Because I'm worried about the asymmetry element, and it, does it just get drowned out by the ease of people just being like, spam, troll, mean, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think the only things that really work at scale take time to change. And it took a while for us to get into a social media world with billions of people interacting on it and it shaping economies and algorithms being used to keep you on it and keep your attention locked into it. I think culturally, we just are going to have to make the decision like, hey, this is here to stay, but we got to change it. And then it changes slowly with those n=1 interactions. Like it's become so normalized that it's just okay. Like you can just
Yeah.
go out there and just like there's a thing called troll. Like it's a behavior that is accepted where imagine the people that are out there as trolls walked around into the real world and go into the real world of less civil places, like go into a real center city area where like there's people there that will assault you if you say the wrong
Yeah.
thing and act 50% as direct as you do in an internet comment. That behavior would almost be instantly gone. You'd realize you're humble, you're vulnerable, you need to be more aware of other people's feelings because if you piss the wrong person off, you could end up stabbed or beat up or like there's consequence to that behavior. On the internet, there's no consequence, and we've just said it's okay to be like this through our actions and through the
Yeah.
algorithm. So yeah, I don't know if there's a way to fix it, but at least if I can curate my channel as much as possible to do that and put that type of energy out there, I don't know, maybe I'm a small role model for a small group of people that chooses to use the platform that way. And maybe people stop searching for just like, is it natural to have a 500 million people following you? Like, is that necessary? Is fame really even worth it at that level? Or should people be saying, hey, I want to build a community of a number of people that really is community feeling, that like the people in there can disagree and have good conversations, and maybe more people doing that over time just shapes a better experience with it. Because I know that right now I'm not following anyone on social media. Like at first thing I did was unfollow everyone and archive all my old account, and I just was like, I'm gonna keep it because I know I'll go back, and because our sport puts info out on it. Like you can't get the Wadapalooza workouts unless you're on Instagram. So I didn't
Yeah.
fully, but I didn't have any of the noise of people in my feed. And when I first came back, I left it that way. And I'm like, oh, this is like less stressful. And my search algorithm is all like dogs and fighting and things that I just like, they make me happy.
Dance moves.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yep.
uh,
I
so,
love your dance moves.
oh man, you're one of a very small number of people that
I
ever
am a
said that
constant
statement.
I'm a constant consumer of any dance content you
Oh,
put
that's
out.
fun.
So just know that I am watching every time.
I
I'm
actually,
smiling.
weirdly enough, have a
Yes.
very small number of very cult following people around my dancing. They're like, put up more videos. I'm like, do you know how embarrassed this makes me feel to put up these videos that I can't dancing?
No, you have gotten better.
Good, good. I like to hear that.
Yeah. I love
Yeah.
watching that.
Good.
Oh man. But then I guess kind of turning it back a little bit to the community that we all definitely associate with and identify with. I don't know. Do you feel like we're at a point, and I'll put this in martial arts terms. We've been hammering at that front leg. We've been trying to chop it down.
Yeah.
And our opponent or the person that we're doing the dance with just keeps coming forward. At what point do we switch, right? Do we what at what
Switch
point do
tactics.
we yeah, at what point do we stop hammering that front leg and maybe go for some takedowns? Or at what point do you stop pulling guard and maybe go
And
on the
go on the
offensive?
offense. Yeah. I understand the fight metaphor is the cultural metaphor talking about we've tried to get change by being involved with CrossFit, and now
Yeah, yeah,
we're going to go
I would
somewhere
say
else.
so.
Yeah.
Or
Um,
or or and I would put it in the terms of like that seems to be, and I don't want to put words in their mouth. That seems to be the mindset of the athletes that say I'm out.
yeah.
Like we have tried this iteration in this path multiple times, and it just doesn't seem to be working. So we have to do something different. Or in that, you know, in for any like to the people that point that hey, CrossFit's done some change since then. It took the death of a friend or unspeakable tragedy to actually cause this. So is it genuine?
Yeah.
That's kind of where it lies, I
Yeah.
guess.
Well, I mean, now is the time to change tactics. And that's why I said I don't blame them. Like they have
Mhm.
an opportunity. And in it, there's a lot of sports that have had this kind of a model. I did some research and read some books when I was being involved with the PFA, like golf right now with the Live Tour and the
Mhm.
PGA
Yeah.
Tour. So it created the same type of thing. I know we're not the same income level. It's not the same viewership, blah, blah, blah. Yes. But whatever, it's still a sport that was largely owned and orchestrated by a singular group. A bunch of people were unhappy with a lot of the structure of how things were going, slow play, viewership, the money at the bottom end of the tour, how much money the winners were getting relative to how much the tour was getting was out of disparity. They tried over and over and over again. Somebody comes in with external money, bunch of the top stars go, a lot of people crap on those people and hate them, and it creates conflict in their world. And then you fast forward 2 years later, and now they're doing a merger and coming back together, and both things are better now because the
Yeah.
athletes got what they want, and the main thing got pressure put on them, and their monopoly got taken away. So
Mhm.
I really am in support of these other things. Like I think they
Mm.
should take their stand and go and do it. Now, if I could play a alternative universe out, I do wonder had all of them, by all of them meaning all of the best athletes in the world at the sport of CrossFit, and including, let's say, the top 50 in the world of masters divisions as well. So you have and teams, and you have representation all the way up. And let's say you had 80% buy-in because you'll never get 100% athlete unanimity, but you have
Yeah.
80% of people saying, hey, we're all going to agree that CrossFit made some changes this year and we're going to participate in the open. and we're going to try to qualify for the games. By the time we get to the games, if the games are not changed in the way that we want, we are all going to work together to orchestrate a display of force at the games. We're going to all take a knee. We're not going to compete. We're going to whatever, we're not going to wear the gear. Now, obviously, that would have had to been done at a very high level of organization that does not exist, and it's impossible to do now. But if you could play that out, I think there would have been enough negotiation leverage to actually make change in what they wanted to make change in doing. Going about it the other way, there was really no leverage. There wasn't enough unanimity from the athletes. They didn't have representation of enough of the people. Like when CrossFit made their board, the first thing that they did was included people from all the other divisions, whereas the PFA was mostly focused on the tip of the spear professional athlete infrastructure. So I do kind of wonder like what would have happened if we could have gotten to that point. But because we're not, I think if they go off and execute, it's better for them because they don't have to deal with whatever they felt they were dealing with in the space. It's short term better for CrossFit because CrossFit can kind of control their narrative, but probably long term worse if they execute over here. And it'll put the negotiation pressure in place that maybe we can bring it together and create a unified season. And CrossFit maybe is just one stop on the tour, or the tour is part of the whole infrastructure, and Rogue and Wadapalooza and Sid are all working together in some sense. But I'm not sure. I'm not sure really where it's going to go. But I think now was the time that something had to happen. And
Yeah.
I'm kind of glad it's happening. Like, I don't look at them and be like, oh, I can't believe you're doing this. I just am like, I'm not making that move because I have a vested interest over here also. But I'm going to come over here and try to support you and make it work because I think if it works, both things get better.
Yeah.
Do you think that there's going to be a world, though, or there could be a world where we see World Fitness Project and CrossFit merge similar to Live and PGA?
Maybe, I don't know. I mean, who's going to own CrossFit next year?
It's a great
Good
question.
Yeah, I mean, at some point it'll probably sell. If they sell, it really depends on the context of the new owner. The new owner could say, hey, we want to spin the sport off. And then you could probably sell the games for a much smaller fee because most of the revenue models through the affiliates, and maybe the WFP could buy the CrossFit games, or there could be a tour. If somebody comes in and they're like, hey, we think there's a lot of upside in the sport and we want to invest heavily in the sport, maybe they would try to go to WFP and create a merger or something like that. But I think it really depends on who owns it and who's in charge. Because I think, like, let's say a new person comes in charge and Dave ends up not being there. I think most of the athletes that left, that was really the biggest thing that they were kind of upset about, is as if one person in the whole infrastructure. So if you potentially remove that person with the new owner, maybe some of the problems are just solved. And they're like, hey, we want both. We want the CrossFit Games to stay as it is. And we also want a tour because we can't create a living off of just one games event all year.
Yeah, man. I like that thought experiment and kind of going into those directions because I don't know, man. It feels like we are at a crossroads in many ways, but also that crossroads provides multiple paths to potentially something much better. So but also at the same time, and I don't know if you go through this or not. I have struggled with the idea of the death of what I thought was a potential awesome thing in that early grassroots momentum of the sport. And 7 to 8 years of really unfettered growth and success where, you know, and we've talked about this a bunch in our show, where the launching pads for the sport were there in terms of like major TV deals and things like that and distribution deals. And then it went away. And there was always the belief that we can get back there, but it feels like even if it did, it would be different now. So it's almost like this death of this romanticized, like, I don't know, adolescence maybe is the best term for it. But
Yeah.
my biggest internal conflicts have been like, okay, well, what will take that place? And if it's not, is this time to just put that to bed?
Yeah. I mean, I would say that hope is very small that it would get, like, we were on this trajectory And had they continued pushing that trajectory, I think it could have turned into that. But I think that the choices that were made, if that was like a possible future, like it killed that possible future. It doesn't mean that I don't think that the level of success and monetary reward and all that stuff can get back up there. But I think there's too much now. At a certain time, they had a real stranglehold on the whole organization of the sport. And in like 2018, there were these other comps, but they were like so small in comparison. Like the CrossFit Games was like this, and these other comps, prize purses and media was super small. Now, some of these competitions are massive. They're bigger participation in person. They have great media infrastructure. They got big prize purses. Now this tour is coming out and they're giving people guaranteed salaries, and who knows what's on their long-term roadmap. But I'm assuming if they're investing in year one like this, that means there's bigger things to come in the future. So I think no matter what, if this kind of sport thing keeps growing, the dream that we had of what you just said is it's just never going to be that. Even if it is the CrossFit Games as part of it, it's just that kind of and a lot of the people that made it that way are no longer working for CrossFit. Like some of it is just having really good people in the media. And now all those people are in different places. They're doing their own YouTube channels, their own shows. Sometimes they're not invited to the events and sometimes they are. Like so there's no force being put into the same direction in the same way that it used to be. So I think no matter what, it's going to be different.
For sure. I've heard it relate. Someone else made this analogy for me. It's like it's when like say, you're someone who loves baseball and your kid, you can see them like, man, they have a potential to be really great at baseball and they're on this track. And then one day they just decide, I don't like baseball anymore. And you're like, but if
But
you
you're so
did,
good.
I could see where that would be. And they're just like, no,
You could have been so good.
yeah, and like, no, I don't want to be. I'm good. I want to go, like I don't know, play with trucks or something. I don't know, but yeah,
You got to get to a state of acceptance sooner than later, man.
100%.
Time to move on.
Yeah.
No, but I think there is, even with CrossFit, I looked at the live stream, even our own internal podcast and 25.1 videos, they outperformed last year's videos in terms of total views and people
Oh,
interested
wow.
in them.
Oh,
And
wow. Yeah.
I saw the barbell spin stuff, but I went on
Mhm.
just YouTube and I looked up 24.1 video and it had like 60,000 views. And then I looked up 25.1, which was like 800,000 views. And I was like,
They clip those. Those are different videos.
oh,
So that they have the 24.1 stream, and then they also clip them and republish parts of them. So the analytics behind that get a little wonky.
oh, I was wondering how I was having a hard time. I was like, man, I'm scratching my head trying to figure out these numbers. But
Yeah.
regardless, I thought that we would see at least a drop in viewership that was in parallel to what we saw in a drop in participation. But
Mhm.
I don't
Good
think
point.
it was in the same parallel, which means that the interest is still there in what we're doing. It's just the interest in participating and supporting CrossFit HQ has dropped. But that means that at some point, either CrossFit HQ could make amends and bring those people back into the space, or the vacuum that was created will be filled by WFP or other events popping up. Like I've talked to a lot of people in the competition space that are really good at event organizing and really want to make this thing better and doing it in a lot of different realms. So I would imagine over a long enough time horizon, somebody's going to get it right.
Yeah. Yeah.
I hope.
We all hope. Fingers crossed.
This is my new unrealistic dream.
I think we need a hope poster with Max's face like silhouetted
Yes,
on
and
the
his hands,
side.
like, in the air or something, yeah.
All my
No, I
close
want.
people will be like, hey, you're a little bit more skeptical than this picture makes it.
Well, I want there to be like a little bit of I don't know, conflict in the photo. It's not just him standing there; it's him like throwing a wicked uppercut, and then it just says hope. You're like, wait a second. You're like, okay, yeah,
It's got to be a good dichotomy between the words and me doing something non-hopeful.
yeah.
Yeah, I like
Yep.
it.
Oh
But you
man.
keep yourself diverse in the sense of other things that you do. We were talking about your break dancing. I know Tommy has some shade that he may or may not want to throw
No
with your
shade.
golf swing.
Oh
No
yeah.
shade. I
You've
was
been
gonna
at the shooting range.
I was gonna compliment his golf swing. I was like, that is a guy who has thrown roundhouse kicks and knows how to rotate his hips
Yes.
because so many golfers don't
Good
know how to
mobility.
utilize their hips to actually generate power. And I saw that video from Pinehurst. That was pretty good.
We
That was
had a
pretty
good
good.
time. I'm glad I could say it publicly, but I beat all of my friends over that week, so that was a good victory.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Yeah, I love golf. I haven't really played as much as I like because it's a very time consuming and expensive sport. And obviously
Yep.
I'm busy and we operate in a sport that's not like golf, full of money and people dumping money into the sport. But yeah, I keep my training. I did the competitive CrossFit thing for a while. Then I kind of transitioned in coaching and hung on to it for a while and just realized like I can't really do this as a coach and also put the level of intensity into training. And I don't get the type of training results I want. Like instead of doing a workout 5 rounds for time, I personally would rather do a round for time, rest, and do it 5 times because then I'm not like, by the end of that training session, I feel like I did productive work and I'm not like in a daze of pain and feeling like I'm going to vomit. So it means I can
Mm.
handle more training volume. And that slowly started to happen with my CrossFit stuff. And then I was like getting bored because I'd been in the gym for 30 years. So I wanted to try new things. And I was doing kickboxing, and then was like, man, all these people who kickbox, they come out and they can like dance and move their hips and move their body. And I feel like an oaf moving around. I'm going to try dancing because I can do dancing and not have to hurt myself or other people. So it's like it's kind of like martial arts by yourself in some ways. So yeah, that's my training. It's just a mix of all the stuff. And I try to stay fit enough that I can be respectful in CrossFit, but not necessarily do CrossFit the way that competitors do it. I do it more like the old ideology. Like some days it's just all strength. Some days I'm just playing golf. Some days I'm going for walks. Some days I'm doing gymnastics. Some days I'm doing metcons. A little mix of it all.
Variety is the spice of life.
Yeah, there it is. Constantly varied.
Exactly.
Constantly varied movements at varied intensities. That's my training.
That's what at intensities that are also constantly varied.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
Well, Max, it's been so great to catch up with you. This has been such a great conversation, and we just respect the heck out of you and your voice in the space. And we're glad that you're able to come on and have open dialogue here, also on your social media channel, and just keep doing what you're doing because I do think it's good to have a voice of reason on the internet and in person.
Well, I'm
100%.
not sure I'm reasonable, but thank you for having me, and I appreciate you guys making media in the space. Hopefully, we can keep evolving it, keep it growing.
No doubt.
All right. We hope to see you soon, Max.